Hello, my friends. Kathy Myhre here, and I want to talk to you about the emotion of desire today. And in order to effectively communicate about this emotion, I have to back up a little bit and share a little bit of context from the biblical text. So we know that at the time of original sin, that this earth and planet fell into chaos and began to decay. We saw weeds growing. A man would have to till the soil and work would be hard. The ozone layer would eventually be depleted, by all the fossil fuels. And our bodies also experience the fall. Our bodies are decaying and aging and spreading and sagging and all sorts of things. But what we often don't realize is that at the time of the fall, our souls also fell. And our souls consists of our mind, our will, our actions and behavior, and our emotions. And so from that moment forward, what that means is that that part of our personhood became influenced by our experiences on this fallen planet. So from the moment of the fall, how we think, how we feel, the choices we make, how we respond and act are now influenced by our experiences, influenced by the level of nurture we received, by whether we've experienced trauma or suffering. And so it's interesting that some of the major, mental illnesses that we struggle with are disorders either of the mind, emotions, or will. That's why we call counseling really soul care. Now, Paul tells us that we're going to battle this side of heaven with a war between our flesh, our fallen human natures, now influenced by our experiences, and our spirit. When we get saved, God's Spirit comes and dwells within us, right? And so we have the opportunity to be led by the Spirit. Now, often whenever Paul talks about the flesh in Scripture, he talks about the flesh in the plural, the desires of the flesh, the lusts of the flesh, the deeds of the flesh. And that's because our flesh will often pull us in many different directions. So we can have a part of us that wants to lose weight and be healthy, but another part of us that still wants to negotiate for the chemical high we get and the comfort we get when we eat carbs, for instance. And so our flesh is pulling us in many different directions. Paul talks in Galatians about the fruit of the Spirit. And while there are different interpretations, the most common one is that the fruit of the Spirit is love, and as we're sanctified and transformed by God's Spirit, it expresses itself in increasing measure as peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, and culminates in something called self-control, which is the maturity of the fruit. It's the ripening of the fruit. And that word self-control comes from the Greek word enkatheia, which one of the literal translations means self-leadership. And so one of the problems with all of the emotions is that when they are ruled or driven by our fallen human natures, they can lead us down destructive paths, especially the emotion desire. When anchored to our spirit-led self, desire can be very, very healthy. As a matter of fact, there's not many of us here that are not here because of the emotion of desire, if I can be frank. Desire is the seat of motivation, and so many things, great, architectural buildings, art, and organizations are built by this emotion of desire. Churches, ministries are built by desire, and desire led by our spirit is a very, very healthy thing. But some problems can happen with desire. And And so one of the first problems that can happen is when desire is not integrated. And so a healthy person is an integrated person. And so what that means is that my sexuality is integrated with my spirituality. Or my sexuality is integrated with my emotions, so it's not reduced to a biological function. When my work life is integrated with my value system. We are our healthiest self when we are integrated. But trouble happens when desire isn't anchored in our strength and in our wisdom and in our compassion, anchored in the Spirit of God. And when it's not, you can end up as a person on my couch who I know loves God, but suffering because of the result of some crazy decisions that we all have the capacity to make. So that's the first problem. The second problem that can happen with desire is oftentimes we know that at the core, the healthy desires are put there by God. It's not by accident that some of us are motivated, in different directions, and that when we're operating in our gifts, motivated by our desire, the world is going to function at its healthiest best. But sometimes the path that we will take or choose to fulfill that desire may not be the path that the Lord has chosen. Okay? So there's nothing sinful about wanting to make a good income so that your family lives comfortably. There's nothing sinful about wanting to make enough money to have wonderful experiences and build memories with our family. The problem is that sometimes we will seek out passion and meaning in life in ways that the Lord has not ordained. So for instance, there's not a sin to want more excitement and passion in life. But if the only way that you are drawn to do that is by demanding more sex from your spouse, as opposed to maybe starting to coach your son's soccer team, which can really bring about the same high that it can, then we can get off base. And then the third problem with desire is that researchers have figured out that the signal for wanting and desire in the brain is more powerful than the attainment of the desired object. And so what happens then is it leads us humans to exploit the pleasure circuits in our brain by the perpetual pursuit of happiness, never finding the things that are going to fill us up and satisfy. So that can be a problem. And then the third thing is you can't really understand the emotion of desire, again, without understanding something about neurobiology. And I am going to give you the most simplistic version. I mean, they have broken down really the emotion of desire into very, very complex, specific neural functions. And if you want to learn more about this, I will, direct you to Dr. Kurt Thompson's newest book called The Soul of Desire. And if you really want to nerd out, that's going to be good. It's a very dense book. But basically, I want to talk to you about two aspects of desire. So the first aspect of desire is the actual wanting, is the actual desire. And the neurotransmitter that really controls that is the neurotransmitter dopamine, and that's the seed of motivation. That's why a lot of the newer drugs on the market for smoking cessation and for weight loss include the base ingredients bupropion that we find in the atypical antidepressant Wellbutrin, which affects the dopamine levels in our brain. And so dopamine is what allows us to desire, but it also gives us the brake system. But the second problem is that when we awaken some of the pleasure centers in our brain, which happens through chronic, for instance, pornography and masturbation, opiate-like chemicals get released in our brain that can calm us and relax us. And so this is why things like binge eating disorder, things like smoking, things like sexual addiction can be so hard to conquer and treat, because now what we're battling is not just a habit gone awry, not just a psychological addiction, but actually a chemical addiction. Because the process of chronic arousal has the same impact on our brains that chronic opiate use has. And so our brains can actually become addicted in that way. And if you understand that, you'll understand a little bit more how to bring this very important emotion and healthy emotion of desire under the lordship of Christ's Spirit.